the real conversation has to happen, and the conversation has to start with who realistically is coming in here that's going to fix the Jets organizational issues, not just from the GM, but also from the head coach. Who are some realistic candidates, guys, that we think are logical candidates that make sense for a guy? You know, there was a guy that we were talking about a while ago in for the Texans and Bobby Slowick for head coaching. And I don't know. I think some of the regression of CJ Stroud has kind of cooled the water on a Bobby Slowick head coaching talk. And I think it should, honestly. I think these are good insights to sort of have, if you will. You know, you want to see how a offensive coordinator can develop their quarterback, and when they go through those rough spots, how can they get them to bounce back? Because that could be a good telltale of how that guy might do as a head coach, right? Because you're dealing with one specific player or one specific group, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm looking at it. I'm trying to figure out in myself who makes sense to be the Jets' next head coach. People say Bill Belichick. I don't think that's ever happening. I think the way that situation ended years ago, where he left them high and dry for New England at the podium with a note card, I don't think that. I think that's always going to be, you know, embedded in Jets fans' minds, in Jets brass's mind. So we have to talk. Who ideally comes in and fix the Jets? It's crazy to me what a couple years out of the league will do. You got people out now clamoring for John Gruden. I don't know, man. Who comes in and fix the Jets next season? Daniel, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the two parts of this, I don't necessarily know when you look at the head coach, if it's going to be, one of these guys like a Vrabel, like a Belichick, like a Gruden. I think that the smart move could be go offensive minded guy. Obviously, the Ben Johnson's the hot name. I think that this is a team where you could use the offensive minded guy. You don't necessarily need, a huge culture reset. Obviously, you do need a reset, but I think that it would be smart to get an offensive minded guy, albeit that was your biggest problem the past couple of years. And that kind of leads me to my next thing. I think that with the problems lining from the top down, I feel like the GM is actually going to be more important in this search than the head coaches, which is why I would personally go with the offensive minded guy at head coach. And the GM brings me to the point that if you miss on a Zach Wilson, I think that that's something where I didn't give, enough of, I didn't pinpoint Joe Douglas and this organization enough for that. Obviously, it's hard to hit a draft pick, but with a top 3 pick, if you miss on a top 3 pick, that is going to set your franchise back. And I think that that's something that's not talked about enough for the Jets, saying, hey, whether it was Wilson's fault or the organization's fault, you had a top 2 pick and you swung and you missed. And that deserves to see, a huge criticism for that. So when I look at who's the guys that could do the job, I think there's a lot of very, very qualified GM, candidates out there. I really like, I don't know the guy's name, but he works with the Cowboys. He's one of their guys under Stephen Jones. I'm a huge fan of him. And then I really like the guy. He's the one that's getting thrown in all these names with the Detroit Lions, Ray Agnew. He's the guy that has really helped build, the culture for the Detroit Lions. He's really helped Brad Holmes. He's really helped Dan Campbell. So those are two guys I really look at. And like I said, I think that when I look at it, I would go offensive minded for the head coach because that's been your biggest problem. And you still have pieces. Maybe Adams isn't on the team next year, but you still have Garrett Wilson. You have Breece Hall. Somebody should be able to work with this.
You know what's crazy? Somebody put in the comment section, and Parker, I want to get your reaction and thoughts to this as well as Daniel's. They said Todd Monken. People forget Todd Monken was supposed to be looked at as a head coach, and he kept getting passed over, and he left. He left the NFL. He left the NFL, went to college, did great at college, came back to the NFL, and what do you know? Is doing great again. But that's a guy, back when he was the Buccaneers offensive coordinator, a lot of people thought that, wow, this guy could really take the next step. If you remember, the Bengals also interviewed him to be the head coach of Cincinnati. Todd Monken, he's an older guy, obviously, at this point. Not super old, but he's an older guy at this point. But he's been consistent. His offenses have been consistent in the National Football League. And you look at the work he's done with a guy like Lamar Jackson. You get the work that he did at Georgia with guys like Stetson Bennett. And, you got to ask yourself the question, could Todd Monken make sense for the Jets? You get the offensive-minded coach. You get an older guy. But you also have the Aaron Rodgers factor when we are discussing the Jets. How does that work. Because, I feel like dealing with Aaron Rodgers is very similar to dealing with a LeBron James in a sense where
Mm.
it makes a lot of sense for the player more so than the actual coach, because the coach is going to want to have his system that he might want to implement. And I believe Tom Monken might have his pick of where he might want to go, especially if you're a coach. I mean, if you're a team looking to hire a veteran coach and a guy that's done it before, I think Tom Monken makes a lot of sense. I thought that guy should have been head coach a long time ago. I think that guy passed up. And one thing I will say is I've been very, very good at picking head coaches in the National Football League and guys that I think make a lot of sense for teams. So Tom Monken's a guy. He's not a sexy name. He's a guy that's been around for a long time. But if you're looking for stability, if you're looking for a guy that can help take your team over the top, especially offensively, I think he makes a lot of sense. You know who Tom Monken reminds me of, guys, a little bit? Gary Kubiak. That's who he reminds me of a little bit. Just waiting for that opportunity. Obviously, Gary Kubiak had his chance with the Texans. Always filled good offensive rosters. Got a chance to be the Broncos head coach. Took them over the top. Won a championship with them. Again, when they hired him, wasn't a sexy name. People forget there was a one point in time where it felt like the Kubiak name was starting to wear thin a little bit because you kept hearing it over and over and over again. But it was like people thought that guy would be a lifer play caller. He got into a head coaching role with the Broncos, did fantastic, was able to field some amazing offenses for them. And then when I look at it, I look at Todd Monken as in a very similar stature. I think Todd Monken makes a lot of sense, not just for potential Jets, but for a couple of teams. I think Todd Monken makes sense, and I wouldn't mind seeing that guy land a job.
And if you go out and get a Todd Monken, that kind of leads to potentially drafting a quarterback in this year's class. I mean, you look at Todd Monken's a guy that has worked with quarterbacks in the past, and that could be the route that he chooses to go. But Parker, what do you think about the Jets head coaching and GM spot?
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with what you said earlier, Daniel, where, as far as what you're doing, you're going to need to bring in an offensive guy. And I think as far as the head coach goes, you're going to have to bring in an offensive guy and you have to fix this offense. I feel like you have a defense that's in place personnel wise. You have guys there that you can work around. And I feel like you can bring in a defensive coordinator that can just maintain that. But I do think it comes down to a lot of what your future GM does. And I think your future GM, like you hit on, building this team via the draft. And I think if you want to kind of reset this team, it's not necessarily about bringing in these free agents. It's not about bringing in talent that's already in the league. It's going in there, it's amassing draft capital, and then hitting on those picks. I mean, another person in that same class that's I talked about outside of Zach Wilson, Trey Lance. I mean, Trey Lance is getting moved around for 4th, 5th, 6th rounders now. So, I mean, and he's still sitting on the bench. So, I mean, it is hard to hit on picks, but you have to have a guy that isn't going to cripple your team with misses. Where if you don't feel confident in something, you're willing to maybe move back a little bit, get some extra capital, and kind of reload for the future. And that's where I think the GM search is going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting. But funny enough, my name for head coach was Todd Monken. I think he's a great guy that builds a really good culture. He's got a great offensive mind. I think he could fix this team over an off season as far as kind of resetting the culture in the building post Aaron Rodgers, as well as, again, cleaning up the scheme and making this a functional offense again. I think that'd be the best candidate in my opinion.
Because he's a guy
that does more than just fix the offense or work with your quarterback. You have to have a culture shift in this Jets locker room because it's not in a good place right now. And so I think he's a guy that can come in and do that.
And he's a guy I feel like he's gonna be at his peak this offseason potentially. I mean, you look at how the Ravens are looking right now. I definitely like that, and I definitely think that it's kind of funny. I think Malik, you said that he was interviewed for the Bengals head coaching job. I forgot about that. That was a long time ago, 6 years. But yeah, I like that. I like Todd Monken and the Ravens. I like that. I mean, to the Jets.
We brought up earlier some of the GMs. I think the guy you were referring to, Daniel, that worked with the Cowboys, Will McClay. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. It's yeah.
Yeah, Will McClay. He makes a lot of sense. You also got to wonder, and Danny, I want you to touch on him a little bit more. What makes you think he's attractive for the Jets' potential general manager job?
Yeah, I definitely liked how just not only I feel like I saw some of his interviews, and then just because I live in California and I went to some of the training camps, and I just saw how even some of the coaches were speaking about him, and I've just been a huge fan of him, and I know a couple Cowboys fans who have raved about him, saying, hey, well, Jerry's the guy that makes all the decisions, and then even Stevens doing this, but who's really the real talent evaluator? And they're saying it's Will. And I just heard a lot of good things about him. I think that he's a guy where in that Cowboys organization, you're not going to have the true chance to shine. We've even seen that with a lot of their coaches, and we've even seen that with a lot of the guys in the upper management. So I've just seen a lot of good things, and I've seen a lot of Cowboys fans seriously rave about him. So I'm just kind of taking the word with them, and their team where they've had a ton of talent, they've had a ton of talent or success drafting. And just getting guys to have success, not only in the first and second round, but they've had a lot of guys late in, fourth, fifth rounders that have really, really hit. So I think that whether that's fully on him or not, I think that they've just done a very good job drafting. And same thing, they've built up a consistency with their offensive line that's really been their identity. So I don't know. I've just heard a lot of good things about him.
So there's a guy that is not a sexy name that I think makes a lot of sense. And Parker, I remember I didn't expect to spend as much time as we have on this conversation, but Alec Halaby. Okay, he works with the Philadelphia Eagles. He's their assistant general manager. He worked in the analytical department. The Eagles, in my opinion, have the best general manager in all of football, who finds a way to be aggressive, go out there and make trades that make a lot of sense. I actually, Adam Peters might be, but he's in his first year with the Commanders, so I want to kind of give him a little time. I don't want to do exactly what I just said don't do with the Texans, but Adam Peters I've been very, very impressed with. But Alec Halaby is a guy that I think makes a lot of sense. He worked in the analytical department for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's a guy that really worked his way throughout the system. And you want to talk about a guy who's been a part of that culture for so long and has been a part of brokering a lot of these deals that have happened. I think he makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure he'd be interested in stepping out on his own for an opportunity to go to an AFC team. The Eagles obviously probably won't see him as too much of a competition, but I think he makes a lot of sense.
And real quick, Parker, before you get your opinion on that, let me just say they've built the best roster in football. So whether that's on him or whether that's on Howie Roseman, like Malik, it is absurd how good their roster is. And it's not just the first level guys. It is the second level guys. I mean, we can talk about the defensive line, obviously. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, you got edge rusher, Nolan Smith, their linebackers, and the Kobe Dean, right? Josh Sweat as the edge rusher, Bryce Huff's on the IR, but you go look at the cornerbacks, Quinyon Mitchell, Darius Slay, Cooper DeJean, their safeties, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship. This is the best roster in the NFL. So shout out whether that's on him or Howie Roseman. They deserve praise. Because as talented as Jalen Hurts is, this roster is the best roster in football. So just wanted to shout out them real quick. Shout out Howie Roseman because you put this team, there's no reason why they can't make the Super Bowl. This roster is absurd. But Parker, what were your thoughts on Halaby?
Hey, there is a reason, and it starts with Nick over there, buddy. There's definitely a reason. Just wanted to throw that out there. The GM search is interesting, man. That's just where I'm at with it. I think there's a lot of interesting candidates, and I do think it's a strong point to go get a guy that has a history of success. But then it's also, I kind of like what they said in the comments, the chat here. The Cowboys one is interesting as well because you're more familiar being in an organization where you're going to have an owner that's breathing down your neck all the time and telling you what to do and having strong opinions with things. And that's something you have to consider where you have some of these GMs that have been running personnel departments or they've seen how personnel departments have been run. Then they're going to come to New York and they're going to have to deal with a lot of things outside of, just scouting and player evaluation and personnel management, but you're also dealing with potentially a Woody Johnson, potentially still an Aaron Rodgers. And that's where I just think, back to the Aaron Rodgers conversation, if you don't move on from him, it's going to make it very hard to bring in a candidate that you actually would like to bring in to your team.